I'm not convinced that we're really very well prepared at all, to be perfectly blunt. I think there's two real problems we've got as we go in. The first is really the technical side. How well developed is the UK's own understanding of what it wants to achieve in a lot of policy spaces which are going to be important in the Brexit space. Then I think there's a second aspect in which we're maybe not very well prepared, which is that I think that some of the expectations which this administration has encouraged people to have about what can be delivered through the Brexit process are a little bit unrealistic in terms of both what the whole process can deliver and how quickly we can work through and actually be delivering the things that we've said that we want in terms of control of migration, control of our regulatory and legal structures. The idea that we're going to be able to move directly to that as we leave at some point in probably March 2019 or perhaps a little after, I think we need to be pretty realistic about recognising that this is probably going to end up being a more phased and gradual process than much of the debate has suggested so far.
Theresa May arrives in Brussels with her credibility shredded and no Commons majority. What will the EU negotiators make of that?
I'm not convinced that the EU's position had a lot of flexibility built into it based on whether Theresa May had a big majority or not. I think there is now a concern on the EU side that the people on the other side of the table, as it were, may change and may wish to revisit things which had previously been agreed. But I don't think that it was ever the case that a particularly big majority would have really cut a lot of ice in terms of changing how the EU was viewing this Brexit negotiation process. I think it was always the case that the EU has a clear view about what it wants to achieve. It knows the timelines it thinks it's working to. And ultimately, I think the EU has thought that while there was some room to haggle at the margins, the UK was ultimately going to have to align with its view of the process rather than being able to impose it itself.
JP Morgan employs 16,000 people in the UK, but its chief strategist says the government's stance is light on detail and underestimates the size of the challenge.
There are more than 30 regulatory agencies where the UK currently relies on the EU to set the framework, which we need to replace. Now, as of the time of writing, there is not a well-defined single document that I can go to that maps out how we think those regulatory agencies in the UK are going to work, what their general principles of operation will be, what our policy objectives will be in each of those fields. And I think that really what that exposes is that we are now in a negotiation process with the EU where it is perfectly reasonable for the EU to be asking the UK, well, what is it you want to do in those spaces? How are those systems in the UK going to work? What is the prototype for the design? And as I've said, those things just don't exist at the moment. What we have was a white paper which was less than 60 pages long and frankly did not give a clear sense that the design of those agencies was present, thought through and in place. And it's in that respect, I think, that when we go into the negotiations, perhaps looking significantly less well prepared than we might expect to.
Negotiating Brexit is a huge political and practical task. So what could the future look like when it's finally completed?
I think people need to realise that it's in the services sector that we're likely to see the biggest changes through time. And people need to realise that for all of its faults, the European Union is the most advanced and integrated services market that we have in the world. And it's as we leave the EU and as we negotiate a future arrangement, it's in the services sector that the changes are likely to be biggest. And that doesn't just mean financial services. It also means sectors like accountancy, law, broadcasting, consultancy. These are all spaces where the UK has developed a clear specialism and does act to some extent as a one-stop shop for people around the world to get services within Europe. And I think it's in that space that the biggest changes that come as a result from Brexit will come for the economy.